Rob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be with you, Elijah.
All right. Well, I'd first like to discuss today about globalism. You've recently talked about how globalism is overthrowing the world. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this and the major signs you see of this?
Sure. Globalism is maybe a slightly new term to some of the listeners, Elijah, but the globalists or the globalist movement has been around for a very, very, very long time. Its progenitors or the people who created this globalist movement. Others might know the gaggle of people who are at the head of this anti-human movement. Would maybe know them as the Bilderbergers. Would maybe know them as the Illuminati. More recently, Bush Sr. referred to the globalists loosely as the New World Order. So it's a bit of a shadowy sort of concept that has different names and different looks. In much the same way, one of the globalists created entities that some know as Al-Qaeda or ISIS or IS or the Muslim Brotherhood or the thought process here, and I'm making the comparison that the way that the globalists have many identities or many names they're known by, it's to keep people off balance and confused in much the same way that their darling child that they created to wreak havoc on the world, this Al-Qaeda and its many other known names, is to keep us confused because it's been relatively recent that it's become well known even in the mainstream media that America was actually arming and supporting and giving logistical support to Al-Qaeda, and the minute that thought started to crystallize in people's minds, we stopped hearing about Al-Qaeda because they had changed their name to ISIS, and so it's a different name each week, and the reason or the rationale for that is to keep people confused as to what really is going on. And what really is going on is actually quite sinister.
So did you want to expand a little bit on this? How does ISIS, in your view, play in with globalism?
Well, the goal of globalism is one world government, one world currency, one world religion. To achieve these lofty goals, you basically need to do away with sovereign states, or the concept of sovereign states. You need to usurp the sovereignty of nations around the world, key nations specifically around the world, and their nationalist tendencies. You need to strip that away before you can install your solution. So it's problem, reaction, solution, and these people have their fingers on the tenets. They create the problem, they offer the solution, or they put the solution in place, as in they create the threat, which is the toga wearing ISIS man or Al Qaeda man who's going to cut your head off and drag your body through the streets. And then they come in and they bomb the living daylights out of, or send the country that's been infected with this interference. They bomb it back to the Stone Ages, and then they offer their solution, which is to bring the world towards some sort of a united utopian brotherhood. We see it expressed in Europe, the move towards the European Union is but one of the steps the globalists have employed, because before you can have one world government, trying to get the whole enchilada in one go is too much of a move. So they try to do things what they've been trying to do is things incrementally, by organizing the world into trading blocks like the Eurozone, like NAFTA, North American Trade Zone, and then we are starting to see the emergence of the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, which then amalgamates or draws the pieces, because the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the other acronyms for these international trade pacts, all they're really doing is they're merging NAFTA with the Eurozone, and this is very consistent with the concept of one world government, because the terms that are being applied to these international trade pacts supersede the Constitution, they supersede the Bill of Rights, they supersede. So what they're doing is they're creating the supranational global entity right in front of our eyes, which is why they've been so reluctant to divulge the details and the small print about the conditions that are contained in these trade pacts. And people that have insiders, politicos who have seen it, have made comments to the effect that if these details were publicly known, the people would flat and outright reject it. And the reason people would flat and outright reject it is because, there's still a lot of people in America and in other countries around the world who love their own country and have nationalist thoughts and don't want to see their countries folded into this wicked, tyrannical, elitist oversight.
In an article you wrote that was posted on silverdoctors.com, you wrote, "From a historical context, it may be argued that global domination begins and ends first with control of Europe." So can you expand a little bit on why Europe was the place where global domination started?
Well, because I'm just going to say the economic might of the world seems to have been, for the most part, in the last 200 or 300 years, been centered in Europe, because we had the British Empire, and the pound sterling was basically or effectively the world's reserve currency for a very, very large number of years over the past 300 years. And then we, of course, after the Second World War, the sterling standard was replaced by the dollar standard as the world's reserve currency. But the controlling interests of, for instance, America's central bank are largely and mostly European based, and it's the royal families. Ostensibly, it's the royal families of the Dutch royal family, the British royal family, and the power base in the world has basically been Europe. And look back in just even in recent history where the most recent call it attempts to take over the world have come from. Hitler and Germany's quest to take over the world. Came right from the center of Europe and projected out. And before him, like Napoleon, same sort of deal. And this is like like when I think in terms of where culture has, or where most Western culture anyway has evolved from, it's rooted in Europe. So it's no coincidence that the first the first really envisioned trading bloc was the European. I guess in the early years, it was the European Economic Community, which later evolved into the concept of the euro, and which later, because the European Union came into being around about the millennium, and isn't it so very interesting the very situation of the euro coming together, and how questionable it all was, particularly when George Soros knocked the pound sterling back in the early 90s out of the exchange rate mechanism, or the ERM, and that prevented Britain from being initially to be a full-fledged member of the Euro community, and then later in the 90s, when the long-term credit LCM, long-term capital management, had their debacle. One of their biggest investors was the Bank of Italy, and at the time, none other than Mario Draghi was the finance minister of Italy. And he had, on the advice of Goldman Sachs, he had leased sovereign Italian gold, whereby the gold was sold into the marketplace. The proceeds of the sale were invested with long-term capital, and long-term capital then made a heavily leveraged bet in Russian bonds. The Russian government defaulted on the bonds. Long-term capital blew up. And Italy was now owed the gold that they had leased and the money. And isn't it amazing how the globalist servant, Mr. James Rickards, who at the time was the legal counsel for long-term capital, was appointed as the point man to do a secretive workout of long-term capital management. And because details of it, or if details of Italy's loss of money and loss of gold had become public knowledge, Italy very likely, from a financial perspective, would not have qualified for the euro under conditions laid down by the Maastricht Treaty, which was basically the financial governor, or checklist that countries had to pass to be included in the euro. And Italy was very, very, very close to that line as it was. And if it had been reported that they had lost a lot of sovereign gold and a whole lot of money as well, Italy might have been precluded from being in the euro, and the euro itself might have been stillborn. This is the reason why this bailout had to be done so secretively, because this would have thrown a major spanner in the spokes of the globalist plan to organize the world into these trading blocks, which would later, as in the here and now, be merged via, call it stealth, international trade agreements, to put the pieces together even more. So this whole process, as it's been happening, there have been actors that have been shepherding in their view, the inevitability of this one world government entity, and the primary funding. And of course, remember, people, whenever you create a government, you got to fund it, because without funding, governments really aren't governments at all. And isn't it interesting that we have a thing called carbon taxes, which is basically a new global tax on humanity, which is to be the primary funding mechanism for this world government. So the pieces are coming together. And what stands in its way? Well, we see the rise of populism, or you might want to call it nationalism, where you have the likes of a Donald Trump who who sees these international trade agreements as being anti-American, as being pro-elitist, pro-globalist. And Trump is a person that, love him or hate him, the man is a patriot. He's a nationalist, and he does not want to see his country signed on to these international agreements. And this is why the mainstream is so utterly upset with the rise of popularity, and they completely see Donald Trump as a threat to their plan of, once again, this one world government.
Now, I guess mentioning about Trump, I mean, do you think he can win against Hillary Clinton and actually move towards making America first and move away from this globalist agenda?
Well, my guess, Elijah, is that if Trump actually becomes the president, the globalist movement is going to have been dealt a severe blow, maybe a death blow, maybe a wooden stake through the heart. But it's my belief that Trump will be eliminated in some manner, whether he's assassinated or whether he's something very likely, something very bad is likely in store for Donald Trump, because the globalists have, in my view, have shown that they don't care who or how many people get liquidated, as long as they get to their goal. And I honestly believe that the globalists have been behind much of the conflict that we've seen around the world. I do believe they're behind the rise in this jihadi, because they've been arming them, they've been giving them logistical support. So getting rid of some people or creating a false flag event where maybe there's a terror attack of some significant description in an American or in a very international place, and maybe that's the rationale for current leader Obama to maybe suspend the Constitution potentially and say that martial law is what we need for a period of time before things cool down. I put nothing past the interests of the globalists. I think they've been behind some atrocities that have already occurred, and frankly, I think Donald Trump is in severe mortal danger.
Now, I'd like to discuss a little bit about, you were talking about how you think that globalists are creating a lot of the tension and the conflict around the world. You also have discussed about how you think the migration issue in Europe is also done on purpose. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, it's talked about very much in certain circles in America that a strategy referred to as Cloward Piven is employed, and the Cloward Piven strategy was written by a couple of American economists back in the 1960s, and what they postulated was that a country's social network or their social services network could be brought to its knees if it could be overwhelmed with too many demands. So the idea goes as such. You bring in millions and millions of people into a country that has social Medicare, where people don't pay for their on a user basis for their health care, and you overwhelm the system or you bankrupt the system by putting way more demand on the system than the system can provide. Causes a breakdown in national finances, and that creates the chaos out of which some bright-eyed people can stand up and say, I have the solution for this, and the solution for this is, my globalist friendly plan. And, you create the chaos, and then out of chaos you have you provide the solution. And this is a globalist tactic, and it's been used over and over again through the past number of decades in many countries. So this is a very common globalist tactic.
Some people argue that globalism is a good thing, and I know one of the people who's argued this is David Rockefeller. I've read some of his memoirs. I actually got his book at a bookstore here in Ohio, and I was reading in his chapter, Proud Internationalist, that, there's this really infamous quote from him on the second page of that chapter, page 405. He basically admits that he's been, part of a secret cabal to institute a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will, he says. And he also goes on to say that populists believe in conspiracies, and one of the most enduring is that a secret group of international bankers and capitalists and their minions control the world economy. Because of my name and prominence as the head of Chase for many years, I've earned the distinction of commander-in-chief from some of these people. And instead of denying that any of that is true, he goes on to say, populists and isolationists ignore the tangible benefits that have resulted from our active international role during the past half-century. Not only the very real threat posed by Soviet communism overcome, but there have been fundamental improvements in societies around the world, particularly in the United States, as a result of global trade, improved communications, and the heightened interaction of people from different cultures. Populists rarely mention these positive consequences, nor can they cogently explain how they would have sustained American economic growth and the expansion of our political power without them. So I guess, what is your response to that, to people who say, like David Rockefeller says, we're trying to promote globalism. Yeah, that's true, but it's actually been a good thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll respond to David Rockefeller in the following way. The globalists were behind the deposing of the Tsar in Russia and the Russian Revolution, which gave us Joseph Stalin, who liquidated 40 million people. I've also read some David Rockefeller, and I've also read that his utopian view, and many of his acolytes, their utopian view of the world would be a model very similar to that of Maoist China. Well, Mao in China, who was installed, it's a matter of historical record, was installed by the Western intelligence community, which is globalist controlled, and Mao murdered 80 million people. So this utopian thing that Mr. Rockefeller speaks of is the biggest murdering machine the planet has ever seen. And if my not being in lockstep with him, that his elitist murdering machine should be granted free rein to wreak havoc on humanity, then so be it. Mr. Rockefeller is a disgrace to humanity. What he is a supporter of is anti-human. It is, and it just reeks of contempt for humanity, and it's evidenced by his basically it's evidenced by the product of his wonderful idea in the name of Joe Stalin and Mao Zedong. These are not nice people, and these people, I don't believe, did much good for anyone in the human race. So that's the way I would respond to him. And frankly, the aiders and abettors of these people, in my mind, are some of the biggest war criminals that humanity's ever known. And maybe Mr. Rockefeller should take a seat in a court in The Hague and be tried for crimes against humanity.
Now, one of the things you talked about is part of the globalist agenda is eugenics, and how many globalists believe that the globe can only support 500 million people. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this?
Yeah, 500 million. And there's currently 7 billion roughly on the planet. And, you know, the contempt can be shown or explained by any one of a number of things. Let's start with chemtrails. Let's start with a program that is not even denied to be in existence. They're spraying stuff in the air and it's even admitted it's a test. It's some sort of a test program for altering climate. Well, if things are being sprayed in the air to alter climate, why are we having a discussion about man-made climate change? And why aren't we talking about the crap that we know is being sprayed as part of a secret program that they won't divulge the details of? Why isn't that being discussed? Let's move on to the GMO food. Why is it that companies like Monsanto, who create genetically modified food, in their own cafeterias, their own scientists refuse to have GMO food in their own cafeterias? But yet they tell us there's no problem with it, and it's also good for us. When countries all over Eastern Europe and in South America have banned GMO food, much to the chagrin of the globalists who control America, and this seems to greatly upset them that the rest of the world doesn't want to be human guinea pigs for their GMO food. You know, the same thing can be said about vaccines. You know, these are all things that they don't even want to have any part of themselves, and yet they want to foist it on the rest of humanity. And you know, their actions speak louder than their words. The story that comes from these sinister people seems to be do as I say, not as I do. In America, they're trying to disarm people. They're trying to basically get rid of guns. This has been a big globalist push too. You know, yet the globalists themselves, they routinely walk around with 7 or 8 armed bodyguards. And so if guns are so bad, and if they really want to get rid of the guns, then why don't they become the examples and get rid of their, you know, their bodyguards and their guns? So, you know, it once again, Elijah, it's a case of do as I say, not as I do. You know, anyway, it's their actions speak way louder than their words. Let's just leave it at that.
All right. Well, I guess I was wondering, did you also want to discuss a little bit about, you know, we've talked about before in previous interviews how you think that there's going to be an economic collapse coming in the near future. Now, you know, it's the old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. So what do you see globalists trying to do if we do see this kind of economic crisis? How will they use that economic crisis to their advantage?
My belief is that when an economic crisis actually unfolds in living color in front of our eyes, which I believe is actually happening behind the curtains right now, as evidenced by unprecedented emergency meetings, three or four of them in 4 days back a couple weeks ago. We saw after the Federal Reserve met in an extraordinary closed-door meeting on a Monday morning, Fed Chair Yellen then went over to the White House and met with both Obama and Biden in the afternoon. This, I'm led to believe, is an absolutely unprecedented occurrence that the president and vice president's meeting with the Fed chair, and what that screams is that there is something afoot of absolute critical national security to the United States that's either unfolding right now or is about to unfold, because there'd be no other reason why such a meeting would be held unless there was. So it's you see what we're seeing right now, Elijah. We're seeing a lot of smoke. We're seeing smoke, and smoke starting to billow from places where we've never seen it before. And when you start seeing this much smoke, it doesn't take a whole lot of dot connecting or a whole lot of extra thought to think that there might be a flame somewhere, because that's usually what causes smoke. And I'm smelling it, and I'm seeing it, and I'm looking at what's going on internationally, where the likes of China has just signed a memorandum of understanding with SWIFT to basically usher in a new means for the global trading network, or all countries around the globe, to start settling international trade accounts completely independent of American influence or interference. This, in my view, could be absolutely deadly for the dollar. And that, coupled with other recent developments in China, where a new competing gold fix to the LBMA twice-a-day precious metals fixes has been launched by China, where precious metals are now settling exclusively in Chinese currency, the yuan. So there's some big things happening, and there have been unprecedented meetings which equal smoke. And when you see this much smoke, you should really, really be thinking that there might be a flame somewhere, and I do believe there are flames.
So I guess the last question would be, how do you think people can stand up against globalism?
Well, my view of that is to, as much as one can, to withdraw their support of globalist entities. Like, basically try to get your assets outside of the banking system, because I think the banking system is in a very precarious position on a global basis right now. You might want to think about, it's basically being prepared, and the more prepared we get and get informed and network with people and get to know your neighbors and talk about these things, because it's the only reason why the globalists have been able to advance their agenda to the point they have is because they've been able to keep people in ignorance, because they've worked with and they've bribed and they've paid off the mainstream media. This is all documented. You can go read about it. It's not a conspiracy theory. These guys have key players from the media, from the financial arena, and from the political arena, all on their payrolls, and so in effect, it's ignorance. It's ignorance that's allowed this to propagate and proliferate, and networking and communicating and having the courage to stand on your haunches and talk about this stuff is the way to defeat it. And I do believe that I don't believe that these globalist forces that are in play are guaranteed now to reach their goals. And I think their whole movement is in serious danger right now. And it's even been admitted as much by the likes of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who has made public pronouncements in the last number of years that their movement is in jeopardy because people have never been this awake before since they've been working on their plans. So it's I'll tell you, a guy who says it right, like him or hate him, Alex Jones. He talks about defeating this globalist carnage. he talks about it as being an info war, and it is an info war. And even the likes of Hillary Clinton has admitted it's an info war. She actually said it publicly that we're engaged in an info war and we're losing that war. And the reason they're losing that war is because of people like you, Elijah, because of people like Alex Jones. It's because of the alternative media. And the alternative media is growing in leaps and bounds because the mainstream media has been derelict and complicit with people who are anti-human. That's why they've lost their franchise. And I guess at the end of the day, what we can really thank is the internet, because the internet has been a great equalizer, and it's given humanity the ability to fight back, and humanity is fighting back.
Now, just one other thing I remembered was you've talked about how the globalists try to divide and conquer, and that's really one of their tactics to keep humanity off balance and off focus. Did you want to discuss about that and the importance of uniting people, not dividing people?
Sure. Hopefully broadcasts like this are the type of thing that bring people together. And if you want to talk about how they use the divide and conquer tactics, it's been well documented that the riots that occurred in Ferguson, there was millions upon millions of dollars allegedly spent by George Soros, one of the most famous globalists. Just to throw a name out there, and interestingly, he also happened to be a Nazi collaborator, because Soros is a Jew, but he collaborated with the Nazis to basically have fellow Jews liquidated and their assets seized. And he's very proud of this, and he's actually proclaimed that in interviews with the likes of 60 Minutes in years gone by. But he was providing funding to the people that were behind causing racial incitement in Ferguson, and to have people rallying against the police and inciting white against black violence. And he's supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement, and the Black Lives Matter movement is not really an organization that is pro black at all, because these people don't really care and don't even want to talk about the overwhelming proportion of abortions that occur in America are black. Anyway, they have a very, very conflicted message that they try to deliver to the world, and these are the types of organizations that are funded by the likes of George Soros, the globalist. Soros was also a very strong financial supporter of of a group of terrorists who overthrew a duly elected government in the Ukraine. And George Soros has actually been bragging in the last couple of years about how he caused the uprisings in the Ukraine. So that's something he wears like a badge of honor. So it's divide and conquer, and whether it's pitting white against black, or whether it's pitting Muslim against Christian, or whether it's pitting Jew against Palestinian, or whether it's pitting women against men, or whether it's pitting the state against the family. These are divide and conquer tactics that are used over and over and over again by the globalists. It's one of the go-to things in their playbook.
Well, Rob Kirby, if people would like to find out more, they can go to your website, kirbyanalytics.com. And once again, thank you so much for your time today.